Hi guys, so this is a simple breakthrough video of my process, how I create images like this or this or this. They are all from this guy, Sant'Elia. It was an Italian futurist, and they are based on his sketches from a book The Complete Works. You can see it right here. So here are some of the illustrations he made for the following images. Now I am going to show you the breakthrough mainly on this one, mainly on this last image, but here and there I might pop with some others. So I start by analyzing the sketch and picking up elements it is made out of. The actual modeling is made with very simple shapes and objects. There is actually very little modeling involved. I usually use mainly array modificators. I duplicate objects with Alt-D for making instances instead of Shift-D. This enables me to work a little bit faster. In some cases or for some elements I just delete only faces and convert the object to curve to access some curve settings, and then I go and convert back to the shape. As you can see in this sped up footage, the modeling is really simple. It's more or less visual thing, and there are very little technical measurements involved. For camera I set up very similar view as is in the sketch, also with the resolution. I try to use a rule of thirds for overall composition and balancing. And for composition I would highly recommend video from Blender Guru about the composition. I will link the video in the description. I have also this quick tip regarding camera setting. I'm looking at this building and these people. Now my camera is actually at the height of the people's head, so that's all right. And I want to put all this large structure in my viewport, in my view of the camera. So, and also I have this ground, which is too much. So one solution would be to rotate camera on its local axis, double press X or any X, Z or Y to get local rotation. And now I have my whole building. Also there is a lot less of the floor visible, but the problem is that the vertical lines of the building are starting to disappear in perspective. They are more diagonal, and they are not at 90 degrees towards the frame of the picture, or how should I say it. Basically, if you look at any professional architecture visualization, the vertical lines of the structures are always parallel, and they are always at 90 degrees towards the frame. Again, they are parallel, only the verticals. The horizontal lines, they are in perspective, which is fine, but the verticals are always straight up and down. They are never diagonal. In any professional architecture visualization you have this. So how could we solve this problem in Blender? Now in camera settings you have this Shift X and Shift Y. You just, I believe it's Y, yeah. So you just move this parameter up and down, maybe zoom out a little bit, and let us rotate. No, actually don't rotate. Move this a little bit down. And now we have the best of the both worlds. Now this is a little bit too much in regular circumstances. I would zoom much out, or maybe set the focal length of a little bit higher and zoom a bit out, so the perspective dilatation wouldn't be so big. But this is the way to go. You have straight parallel vertical lines, and you still have perspective on the horizontal lines. And then I add some details to the overall building object. Details like people, details like trees, maybe some rails, maybe some windows, and so on. Basically, for this I am using principle of primary, secondary, and tertiary elements. And this principle is essentially a blueprint how to arrange or compose various elements of your scene. So basically each scene, whenever natural or human-made, is composed of a few large-scale elements, huge blocks, for example, or silhouettes, if you could say. Then you have some secondary elements put to place, which are smaller, but they are more prominent. And then you add some tertiary details to create variety and so on. You could use people, you could use birds or clouds for scale. And what I'm trying to achieve on my last renders is that I'm trying to bring some of the details a little bit forward. So I wouldn't have some large open space in the front. So for example, here are the railroads, here are the windows, here are the stairs, here are also some windows, and so on. This brings out also a little bit of the color from the sky. I discovered this by accident, actually on this render, that I want to bring some color of the sky more into the object itself. So I started creating these windows like these over here. At the end of the modeling, I will end with something like this. And now it's time to put some materials on. At the very essence, I'm using basically three categories of materials. They're all very basic and very simple materials. You will be really surprised by how simple they are. So basically, primary is concrete. That is also subsurface scattering, and it's a primary color of the scene. Now, second category is color of the same hue, let's say, but it's a little bit darker. It's also metallic, or it has some different structure to it. It's not an SSS material. It's used for contrast, to add some variety, and so on. Now, as for the concrete SSS material, it's important to match your texture size to your people and overall elements, otherwise your scene could feel a little bit out of place. And now I have glass. Now this glass is used in variations. I'm using clear glass for lamps, for example, but I'm using this checker glass to create these windows over here. So that's about it. Now I'm using this little useful function. When you press E, Blender starts an eyedropper, and you could pick any color from the scene you have. Like, you could also pick the gray from the actual user interface of Blender. So you could load some image in your texture editor, and you could color pick any color from the image. Now lights, I'm using lights behind the glass windows. The lights are of similar color than the glass, and I also try to make the glass of similar color than the actual intended background. Basically, I'm using two color system. I'm varying the two colors with their hues or lightnesses and so on, saturations and such, but essentially all my renders are made with just two colors. I'm using this colors.co color palette, where I search for anything that I find appropriate and I test it. Now, I would also recommend really highly this color video from Blender Guru also. It's a really good video about how to make color compositions and how to pair essentially colors with many examples. Link will be in the description also. For environment, I'm using sometimes solid color, sometimes linear gradient, where I try to match the colors with the secondary color of the color palette. The main lights are sun and some backlight to control the shadows, and their color set to neutral. I'm using maybe white, maybe a little bit orangish, reddish, maybe a little bit bluish, just to fit the overall color palette. All this is rendered with cycles on default settings. Maybe the one change I'm making because of my computer and because of the resolution I'm rendering it in, I'm turning auto tiling off, so I wouldn't waste 2 hours of rendering maybe one tile. And finally, after all the test renders are done, there are no bugs and we are satisfied with the finished product, it's time for post-production in Photoshop. Very important step, and the one that brings actually the most out of this type of picture. It essentially makes out of this. So this is one step, editing this image with the camera raw filter, and then is the step of making some adjustments to our raw render from Blender. This is give me a second, I will turn off the layers. Alright, so basically this is the final image, the product we get from Blender. Now I usually create some gradient for background. This is very basic stuff, so I will just really move fast forward. So little bit of tweaking around the horizon to bring up a little bit contrast on the power lines, adding some structure of sky. Yeah, this will really pop up once we edit it with the camera raw filter. Then I'm using a little bit of horizon haze behind the building, and also some haze, really tiny one. Let me bring this a little bit up, really tiny bit, just to make the overall building pop a little bit better. Then is our render. Oh, I see, I also a little bit highlighted the glass. Now I also use a little bit of fog haze. This brings a little bit of depth, just a little bit enhance the overall depth of the image. I was using also this mask. This is just an alpha mask. I use it, control click the layer. It will select front of the building from the background to create some layers. Now I also have some highlights on the lamps. The reason this is so slow is that this is the original image, the full resolution, 7000 to 4000 pixels, so this is quite large image, so that's the reason why this is slow. This is the lamps highlights, yeah. Then I use some highlights on these blue lamps just to make them a little bit glowier. And the last group is used for the planet and for the moons. In each image I usually add some planets and moons to balance the overall composition of the image and to add something interesting in the image too. So they are hand painted. I usually start with some circular mask, something like that, and then I will use masks to create gradients. They are all brushed. It's all hand painted. Maybe here and there I use some gradients instead. So I always use this glowish layer. Then there is the base. All right, let me exchange. Yeah, I have just this plain base that is masked out with brushes. Then below that there is this glowing atmosphere, or how should you call it? Now notice that the lower you go towards the horizon, the less you see of the actual planet. Now that's because the lower you go to the ground, from the sky to the ground, the more dense the air is, the more particles are, dust and water vapor and such. So the lower we go towards the horizon, the less of the planet we actually see. So that's the reason why it's masked in this weird kind of gradient. So that's the reason why this part is most visible. So the atmosphere of the planet, a little bit of the highlight on the base, so you get a little bit more depth, more spherical feeling. Now this is, you can actually barely see it because this layer, I will make it a little bit more visible. So I use some structure like cloud maps of Earth, or you could use some Venus map from NASA or anything. I basically just put here some structure to add a little bit more realism. Now the reason why this is at 3% and very visible here is that once I make my edits with camera raw filter, it will really sharpen them and bring them up at in an exponential way. So basically, if I would make it visible over here, like let's say 10%, and update my smart object, you will see that the structure is actually visible much more than I personally would like. For some of you this might be better. I like it when it's a little bit less. It might be not 3%, let's make it 5%, and we will see. Another layer is just a duplicate of the planet without the structure, because this one is, I call them moons. These are, let's say, too far away to see any additional details, but really this is up to personal preference. So these two additional layers, they are just the moons. All right, so this is our base. This is the version without any editing, and I will guide you through my changes. So in the filter, I will get camera raw filter. Now let's start with the basics. Now I don't usually mess up with the temperature a lot. In this case, now this is all based on personal feelings and preferences. I will just guide you through what I usually do. Now for this image, a little bit of warmth is desired. I like how it brings up the yellows. As for exposure, I will just leave it as it is for now. Contrast I will also leave, because the main thing that brings the prettiness of the picture, or what I think you all guys like, oh come on, let's get somewhere here, is changing the texture, clarity of the image, yeah, and a little bit of dehaze. Now let's get to the fit. Now as you see, these things, these three settings will really nicely bring up the structures and the details of the render, of the texture, of the concrete texture we use, and it will also make the subsurface scattering highlights on the material a little bit more pronounced. Now this is don't overdo it. You could easily overdo it and make it like too much of a contrasty thing, contrasty image. So let's scale down. Now as for vibrance, you could adjust it. Sometimes I adjust it, sometimes I add a little bit, sometimes I decrease vibrance a little bit. It depends on the color palette you use. For now, I think a little bit less is better. So this is for the basic color correction. I don't play a lot with curves. That's for one. In detail, I'll just put manually around 15 sharpening, maybe 10, up, 10, 15. Yeah, it doesn't matter. It doesn't do a lot, but it's a nice touch. Now, I used to do a lot with color mixer, but right now I am I'm much bigger fan of color grading, of this tool right here. So you basically this tool basically you decide to which color shadows, highlights, and midtones are going to be trending. So let me give you a big demonstration. So let's say that I want my shadows to be this really nice aquatic green. I can make it a little bit darker. I can make it a little bit brighter. This will also decrease the contrast, which I don't personally like, so I will bring it a little bit back. And let's find some combination that works really cool. Now this is something interesting. Yeah, but I think it works much better when it's this saturated, strong blue. The same for the highlights. You don't have to necessarily use so much of the saturation. The closer to the center you are, the less of saturated the color change will be. Yeah, and the more to the edge, the more saturation will occur. So I just want a little change on the highlights. Yeah, a little bit to the reds. And what about midtones? Let's just experiment with the wheel. Yeah, it could enhance the blues, but also the yellows. Let's enhance the yellows with the midtones, and let's try to use darks to enhance the blues. Okay, something like this. Yeah. Now, I will go back to the basics, and I will maybe put a little bit more clarity and texture on the image to make the structure pop, make it more pronounced a little bit, even a little bit more. Okay, maybe a little bit back. This is just getting the right feeling of it. This is the art part, not the technical part. Now, once I'm done with the edits, also I usually do effects and I add lots of grain. Let's start with 20, 50. This will make the image look more, let's say, real, or I don't want to say old, but it will give the image some nice oldish feeling. I will also adjust the texture, the size. Now the size of the grain depends on the overall image scale of the scale of the image. Now since I'm using really big size for my images, since they are intended for prints, I go with slightly bigger scale. Also play a little bit with the roughness. I think I want to go a little bit down, maybe a little bit more. Okay, let's increase it. Okay, nice. So yeah, I like it as it is. Also the roughness will break the sharp points. The bigger the roughness, the more blurry your edges and sharp edges will be. So you have to be careful with the roughness overall. I don't want it to be too blurry. Okay, so that's for the grain and effect. And the last thing is calibration, and this is literally the feeling of the colors. Now tint I usually leave as it is. I always play with it, but for some reason I don't get too much of a difference, so I will just leave it as it is. Now I will play with the reds, and as you can see, this is some interesting combination with this skin color, peach color, combined with this blue. This blue is a little bit weird, but I really like this peachy color. But you know, just playing with it. Oh yeah, this is too much, I don't like this, so let's bring it a little bit more to the reds, and let's play with the saturation. Oh yeah, I see, this is kind of cartoonish look, too much for my taste. Let's bring it a little bit back to, okay, now greens, let's play with the greens. Yeah, we're the same yellow. So this actually allows us to bring up more of the peach without changing the blues. So I will bring it to the right side, and let's see what the saturation will do. Oh, it's bringing it too much to the orange. I don't like that. And blues, let's play with the blues. Oh nice, this is really sick. I really like this combination, this yellowish, oh sorry, not this pinkish hues combined with the blue. I actually like it probably even more than the yellow. Let's bring it more to the pink. Oh yeah, and let's play with the saturation of it. Okay, so it increased the brightness, and when we go down, okay, it turns more contrasty, more raw. Now I like how this feels, this pink that is usually associated with softness, feminine, and lightness, is and organics, also organic material, is put on this, is used with this contrasty, shadowy and concrete textures. I'm not sure if you understand me. Basically, I like how this color evokes some associations that are in direct contrast with what you see in the image. It's a cold concrete building with lots of structures, metals, and so on, glass, which are usually cold, contrasty, hard surfaces. But they are in this warm, soft color. So I think this might be the reason why you guys like these type of images so much, but with the contrast of the concepts. I would call this a finish. Let's hit OK, and let's apply our filter. So this is something I'm done with, and that's about it, guys. So have a nice creating, and hope to see you soon.